The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Wednesday midweek edition. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. I've already ticked off Elijah Herbel. He has stormed out of the studio. Pre-show meeting was a quick huddle, and I told him that his steak and beer went to Junior as he is in the midst of JV tryouts. So sorry about that, Elijah. Your 2-pound T-bone went to my boy. We will dive into plenty of football topics today. We'll get into some thoughts on Nebraska's quarterback situation. Mike Babcock helps us break it down with HailVarsity.com and magazine in about 15 minutes. Shuey is not literally tied up, but he is a busy man out at Wilderness, so we'll try and run Shuey down next week, get his reaction to the second major of the golf season next week. In hour two, Evan Bland, Omaha World Herald, going to be with us. And then a Jock Doc. Numbers to get in can join us today on Hail Varsity Radio, 489-1240. 489-1240 is the number to dial up. Can email Chris at HailVarsity.com. As always, watch the show and interact via the StreamYard. Can do so the Hail Varsity YouTube channel and the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. And want to catch the show, easy to do on the YouTube channel from the video side. You want audio, we get it, and can do that either podcast with the Spotify, iTunes, Google Play with your Hurrdat family. Do that, either the whole show or each segment. Interesting tweet, really cool tweet earlier today from Sam Griesel. Sam Griesel was part of a Netflix story and movie. And give me a little clarity on this, Elijah, with Griesel. You sent me the tweet. I saw it also on my timeline. And he was able to be a part of the Res Ball. And that's coming to Netflix. And good for Sam. And really pretty fascinating story here. The last 3 weeks, as Sam tweeted out, he had a chance to act in his first ever movie. So Big Red going Hollywood there.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting with Res Ball being so big, and not only in the Midwest, but especially in Nebraska. You remember the run that Winnebago made over the past couple of years to the state tournament? Incredible. I have a feeling that is going to be some sort of inspiration for this. There's also a great Nebraska public media story out there on just what Res Ball means to those small reservation communities. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see what type of movie this is going to be. We know what it's going to be about. And I'm also wondering what kind of role Sam Griesel is going to have. Is he going to be the big villain in the movie? The guy from the big city, from Lincoln, that wants to come crush the reservation dreams. Is that what he's going to be?
I pray. I hope not. I hope not. But it got us to thinking here, and it was probably about 20 years ago that ESPN did a couple of made-for-TV movies. One was The Bronx is Burning. And that was the story of the 77 Yankees during the Son of Sam era. And also, you had a Season on the Brink, the John Feinstein book that was adapted to a movie about Bobby Knight and the Indiana Hoosiers. Brian Dennehy played the general. He played Bobby Knight. Well, it got me to thinking about who would we cast as the last few Nebraska football coaches if they were to do a Netflix special, a Prime Video airing, if they were going to do a coaching movie. I'm not asking for titles. We haven't gotten to the titles yet. That could be its own special, sick, twisted segment itself based on some of the seasons some of the former Nebraska coaches have had. But I like my picks here. If I'm the casting director, I've got two names that come up for me when I think of if they're doing the Bob Devaney story. We'll get Mike Babcock's take on this. But John Goodman All right.
Okay, I like
John
that.
Goodman. And John Goodman, he played the coach in Revenge of the Nerds and loses it in the locker room. The old saying when you were a baby, your daddy looked down in your crib. So that scene always sparks a smile. So John Goodman is Bob Devaney, or even Kevin James as Bob Devaney. And I didn't know Coach Devaney super well at all, really. Met him a couple of times in my life, but those two guys seem to me to be answers if they're going to do the Bob Devaney story on Netflix. Joe Pesci, not from a language standpoint, but just from a stoic stature. Pesci is one of the greatest actors ever, and I think he could be part of the Frank Solich story. And from a height standpoint, from a toughness standpoint,
obviously we'd be talking a younger Joe Pesci than what we have now.
They
which
digitally reversed aged him in The Irishman, him and De Niro. So that is real. They're doing it to Han Solo every time he's in a movie. The Mike Riley story starring Bob Odenkirk.
Oh,
yeah.
You came prepared. That's a good one.
Bob Odenkirk, Better Call Saul. I think he could pull off Mike Riley. For Coach Osborne, the Tom Osborne story, two names come to my mind: Greg Kinnear, and you might know his name as an actor, super talented guy. Or I'm going to go with John Dutton here. I'm going to go Kevin Costner as Coach Osborne. One of those two.
I think Greg Kinnear's a good one.
Greg Kinnear's the comp.
Look, and in terms of like how he acts, his persona, it seems to fit very well. And if you need to figure out who that is, he's been all over TV in recent years.
He's done a few major motion pictures.
I'm trying to figure out.
As Good as It Gets is the last flick, not the last flick, but he was in that popular flick. And then if we're going to do the Scott Frost story, we're going with Jesse Plemons. From Breaking Bad fame, Todd.
I was gonna say he was Landry in Friday Night Lights.
That's fair too.
You've seen all the jokes on Twitter, like they already have.
No,
a guy
I know
Scott Frost.
It's not a reach or real creative by us, but it fits with the blonde hair and kind of the facial structure. And if I'm doing the Matt Rule story, I'm going with Jerry Ferrara, Turtle of Entourage fame.
I got to look up a picture of him.
Jerry Ferrara and Coach Rule look very similar.
Yeah.
Do you have a better suggestion?
I don't have a better suggestion. They'd have to do some work with Jerry Ferrara getting the body right.
Okay.
But facial structure, yeah, he's got that going. I agree with you there.
So there's where I'm at. We can get into some.
The one that we forgot we haven't talked about here is Bo Pelini.
Oh, duh. Well, and I don't know the actor's name. Maybe you can Google it. But the wood chipper guy in Fargo.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know the actor's name, but he had his hair dyed blonde. But the wood chipper guy in Fargo.
Every single time you watch Fargo, I did actually go, wow, that guy looks like Bo Pelini.
Yeah, that guy's putting somebody into a wood chipper. So
Peter Stormare is that guy's name?
Stormare.
Peter Stormare. He doesn't quite look as much like Bo Pelini anymore, but I think you could still make it work. He's balding on top with a mustache now.
And you could also go Jason Statham.
See, I was gonna go
just the you need to trade the British accent for the Youngstown.
Well, see, you've thought up better names than me on just about every single one of these.
It's all right.
It's tough to say who I had in mind.
Oh, I love this. Brian chimes in for my God. Brian has a suggestion for the Mike Riley movie. Steve Carell for Riley. He can use his cluelessness to situationally cross over as Michael Scott. That isn't nice.
That's not very nice.
Oh, and Brian does come off the top rope. God rest his soul. But Ray Liotta as Pelini would have been money.
I was thinking
that would have been awesome.
I had Ray Liotta pulled up, and I went, I don't think we can do an actor who is no longer with us. So the only name that came to mind as being like he could have the fieriness of Bo. It doesn't quite look like him as Hugh Jackman. But I was struggling for a name for Bo Pelini. So good for you coming with.
And just
Peter
slap
Stormare.
Me forgetting Bo. I don't usually forget Bo. So pretty good story from On 3 we'll get to.
Crew chimes in. Get the actor from Voldemort, make him more handsome for Fellini.
Thank you, Crew, for the input, my friend. Let's talk about Jeff Sims and what does Nebraska have in Mr. Sims at quarterback. And pretty interesting. Oh, yeah. The Law and Order guy, Vincent D'Ornforno as Rule. That could work, but he's also Private Pyle from Full Metal Jacket. That same actor.
Oh, no. I think that might be a better one? A better pick.
That's a better take.
You have to dye his hair a little darker, but
I think
that's a good
my
one.
turtle call from as Coach Rule, Jerry Ferraro, would work. But quarterback discussion point. Let's get into Sims here. And what do you think? What do you think about the comp with Sims and Hendon Hooker? On 3, one of their national writers, Matt Zients, said, look, this could be a fair comp. And you've had history of players from ACC programs going elsewhere and thriving. And the first to do it, and Nebraska felt it, was Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was 6-5, 6-6-ish at NC State. And then Russell was the first ever really grad transfer. And look what Wisconsin was. They didn't win a Rose Bowl, but they got to a Rose Bowl. They still went 10-3 in a pretty tough Big Ten in 2011. And Russell Wilson really transformed a Wisconsin program with his ability, an ACC to a Big Ten jump. You have Hendon Hooker, that was a guy that made plays with his legs, didn't have a lot around him at Virginia Tech, and then went to Tennessee, went to a new system under Coach Heupel, and just lit it up. Think about this, man. Think about your 1 year, and he had his ACL, so it cut him short. But Tennessee was poised to be a college football playoff team till his injury. And he accounted for 68 touchdowns. That's insane. Rushing, throwing, and just 5 interceptions. So you get the right fit, the right system, the right match. And the thing about Hooker that was real, and I think a lot of Nebraska players may fall into this category with position coach changes, or just the guys that were stuck in 3 transitional regimes. There's been guys that have been part of 3 head coaches here. You lose your development. You got to reset, and then you got to go try and learn something new before you got the fundamentals down and you're thrust into it. So I think that's very fair when you look at the Virginia Tech merry-go-round, and even going to Tennessee and the Tennessee merry-go-round. If you hit right with the right coach and system, it can be incredible. That's what a lot of it's all about.
And don't forget about the right players around you as well.
Sure, that's a big thing. I think Virginia Tech, while they're much better back in the Beamer era, they aren't what they were. They aren't what they were post-Vic. They weren't what they were with Vic, and that's 20 years ago. That's when they were kind of climbing the mountaintop. Tennessee, mind you, just needed the right coach to come in, because Tennessee had always recruited at a pretty high level despite all of their head coaches.
And my thought with this is, what did Hendon Hooker walk into last year? It was an offense that had the benefit of being able to be pretty simple last year. You have rushing plays, RPOs, and just a couple passing combinations that were not either your RPO or your play action. It wasn't very complicated passing attack, but where they made their money was the fact that they were getting themselves to 2nd and 4, 2nd and 5 a hell of a lot of the time. So it took pressure off of Hendon Hooker. He didn't have to learn this complex playbook. He was able to play free because his offensive line could protect him and his offensive line could give him a rushing attack. My question with Jeff Sims, with Hendon Hooker comp, I think they're both athletic guys with big arms. I think if you put some playmakers out wide, they should be able to find them. Are they going to be able to fit it into a tight window? Maybe not, but if you give them an open read and a rushing attack that's going to open things up for them, they can look like the best version of themselves. Is Nebraska in a place where their offensive line and their rushing attack can do what Tennessee's offensive line and rushing attack did for Hendon Hooker last year, which was really take a lot of the pressure off him and allow him to shine. Is Jeff Sims going to be able to have the pressure taken off him, an offensive line that takes care of him, a rushing attack that makes things easier for him? Is he going to have that next year with Nebraska? That's the biggest question in my mind in terms of, can Jeff Sims be at least similar to what Hendon Hooker did last year for Tennessee, make a big jump and look like a quarterback that you have never been before in your career?
Well, and a lot of, you've got in this On3 article, you've had a couple of comments anonymously by ACC personnel talking about what Sims is and what Sims did not have around him at Georgia Tech. And I think if you're bored on a weeknight and you want to get down a YouTube rabbit hole, go watch Sims against Clemson early in the season. And it was exciting. It was the Sims show with his legs, and then things kind of crumbled around him with some of his help. With Sims, you have the opportunity here to the points you made with the supporting cast. Do you get a defense that helps you out? Do you get an offensive line that is proficient at what you're asked and running, and then let him just kind of go do his thing? The thing that people love about Sims, and I think what Matt Rule loved about him, is how big his arm is and potential for just big plays against defenses with the deep ball and also with the run game. The quarterback run game, as big and physical and fast as he is, that's a big-time stressor on a lot of defense. Brian chimes in. He says Ryan Gosling is Scott Frost. My man Eric Fisher also seconding the Vincent D'Inforno comp here for the movie comment.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Appreciate you for tuning in. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. We welcome in historian, author, Hall of Famer, Mr. Husker Football. It's Mike Babcock at MD Babs on Twitter's. Babber's hunkered down in that football office again. Mike, how we doing?
Doing fine. You gentlemen are doing fine. I can tell by listening.
Well, appreciate the compliment there. And before we get into some football talk, do you have a say? You did the Devaney biography. You've worked with Coach Osborne for a number of years as far as the coverage. Are we off in our movie character assessments if we're going casting director for some of these names we've associated with the legends?
Well, what's happened is that you've actually thrown out a bunch of names that I'm not familiar with.
Sure.
I don't watch a lot of these movies, so had a hard time connecting there. Although John Goodman and Kevin James, I could fit into that conversation. And Ray Liotta, I could fit into that conversation.
Okay. What about Bob Odenkirk from Better Call Saul?
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I didn't watch. I think I watched part of one episode of that.
Okay. Fair enough.
You didn't mention Mark Harmon. He might fit in there somewhere.
Oh, nice. Mark Harmon from CSI whatever.
NCIS.
Have him play Callahan.
Oh, we whiffed on Bill Callahan. There's been so many coaches the last 2 decades I've left off too.
Well, like Mark Harmon at an older age, I know he's a Michigan grad himself, so...
Bo Bridges is Bill Callahan.
I'm thinking Mark Harmon, if you go back and dye his hair back to like the Bill Callahan darker brown.
Huh? You got to go Bo Bridges, dude. Look him up. Brian says Riley is Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is Mike Riley. That could work. Could work.
Bo Bridges works for Callahan.
Yeah, I think so too. So Babber's got to ask you here. I'm going to go back to quarterback recruitment and kind of the pressure, that discussion point when we talked about Raiola early in the week with his commitment to Georgia. 2 different types of pressure. Go maintain at Georgia. You've won 2 championships in that program, and you're going to go in and compete for a starting job. That is super ambitious, and he's a big-time talent. Great work by Georgia to see him as a high school freshman and then get him onto campus 100 times. And even before he was the number 1 player. Interested to get your take on Turner Gill and also Tommy Frazier, that era of Nebraska football, the hype surrounding both of those guys and covering both of them. know that they were a big deal coming to campus, and their task was A, to beat Oklahoma, and B, go win a national championship?
Well, with Turner Gill, it came down to Nebraska and Oklahoma. Those were the two schools that he had narrowed it to. There was talk that Oklahoma was interested in him more as a defensive back, possibly. And there was some question about whether Oklahoma was recruiting him in that context because it didn't want Nebraska to get him.
Right.
I think that was it Lance Van Zandt, I think, had a significant played a significant role in the recruitment by being down there, being from Texas, hanging around, making sure that Nebraska was always there, always in the picture for Turner. There can't be a bigger recruit in the development of Nebraska's national championship teams under Osborne, I think, than Turner Gill, because he was kind of the, this is where he could do either. He could run or he could pass, and Nebraska was starting to make that transition to a run-oriented offense similar to Oklahoma's. Mm-hmm. The conclusion was the way to beat Oklahoma was to play the way Oklahoma played, and Turner Gill was one of the first to move in that direction. I think Steve Taylor was one that fit in there, and you mentioned Tommy Fraser. Yeah, with Tommy, it came down. I think Colorado was in the final mix, and I think, was it Clemson was in the final mix?
Notre Dame was probably there around.
And Notre Dame was in there somewhere, but I think it kind of came down to Clemson and Nebraska, and I think he had made a decision, maybe thinking in terms of Colorado, but his mom said that he needed to honor all of the visits that he had committed to, which brought him to Nebraska for the visit. And then I think Kevin Steele played a significant role in getting Tommy here. There was a story about Kevin Steele playing cards with Tommy's mom when recruiters from Clemson or somewhere were coming in, and he kind of just stepped aside for a few minutes and then came back, and they continued the card playing, and he was the guy that
I can't leave.
Sure
I just started this hand, Mike.
Yeah. So those two were, I think, highly recruited to some degree. When you consider that Turner came down to Nebraska and Oklahoma, that's pretty significant. And then there was a Texas school, I think, involved in it initially. And then, Tommy Fraser, for the schools that were looking for that type of quarterback, he was a significant get there. So I think both those guys were recruited, and people knew that they were significant gets for Nebraska.
Did they come in feeling the hype and pressure? And I ask that because of what was tagged with Raiola as kind of the program potential savior here. You get a 5-star quarterback in here year one. You get some other 5-star talent to follow potentially, and it could have been it's still possible to have a great 2024 if you're Nebraska, just not with Dylan Raiola. I ask about the pressure attachment here. Did either of Gill or Frazier, did they blink, or were they just kind of wired differently? They just kind of came in and went to work about winning the job?
Well, the thing about Turner was that he knew exactly how he wanted to approach things, and he came in and had an opportunity to play right away. I mean, I think Tom Osborne, gave him that opportunity, and he said, "You know what? No, I want to fit in. I want to develop. I want to get to this point before I feel comfortable." And so it wasn't until that. He had that opportunity to acclimate himself to the system when he could have played, when he could have had the opportunity, and he declined in that situation. On the other hand, Tommy Fraser came in expecting and wanting to play. He wanted to be the starter from day one. And he wasn't the starter from day one, but it was that first season here that he stepped into the starter's role, and he never really lost that role, although, we all know what happened in 94 when he had the blood clot system, and Brooke Berringer showed the value of a guy with talent who was willing to be the backup and was ready to step in when the opportunity came. Brooke Berringer leads Nebraska to 7 victories in the Big 8 championship and the national championship game in the Orange Bowl. And then he didn't start that game, actually. Came off the bench, made his contribution, and then, played sparingly as a senior in 1995. You're probably not going to see that these days. A guy like Brooke Berringer with that kind of talent, probably in the transfer portal after a season like he had as a junior, and then not getting an opportunity to play a whole lot as a senior.
Mike Babcock is with us here. It's Hail Varsity Radio. And Mike, I'm going to get back to this conversation here in just 1 second. First, a quick correction to make. I said Mark Harmon played football at Michigan. I was incorrect. He played quarterback for UCLA, and thank you.
Yeah.
Hat tip to Scott for throwing that in the comments. It was Mark's dad, Tom, who had his number retired at Michigan, number 98, if you remember. I believe it was Denard Robinson who wore number 98 to honor Tom Harmon. So I just want to make a correction on myself. I was wrong. Had to get that right. But, Mike, back to the point you were making. You said just a few minutes ago that Turner Gill was a part of Nebraska's mission to go play like Oklahoma. In order to beat Oklahoma, you had to play like Oklahoma, and getting a guy like Turner Gill was huge in that. And we've had the same conversation with Nebraska's Big Ten foes over the past couple of years. If you want to beat the likes of Michigan and Wisconsin and Iowa and even Minnesota, you have to play like them. I don't get your take on Jeff Sims. Is Jeff Sims a guy that you think can help take Nebraska back to a point where you're playing like the teams that you want to beat in the Big Ten?
Well, he has good size. He has the ability to run the ball as well as throw it. I think that's going to be a value to you in the Big Ten to be able to do that. But again, we talk about this every time. It comes down to those guys up front being able to do that. And play like Oklahoma, and the same thing applies now, but play like Oklahoma didn't just mean offense. It meant defense, because you're going against that offense every day in practice, and you see it. And it helps you in that way, because there was a time early on when Nebraska was dealing with Oklahoma's wishbone offense, where Tom Osborne took time each week during the regular season to work against the wishbone, because nobody else ran an offense like that. And your defense had to become accustomed to that. So play the way those teams do is the same thing. It helps the defense as well as the offense, is what I'm saying, because you see it in practice and you have an opportunity to do that. And I think Sims is probably the kind of quarterback, because of his size and the physicality, I would assume, because he's shown that he can run the ball. And that's one of the things that Matt Rule liked about it was, hey, he's coming in, he can run as well as pass the ball. That's how you get to be successful, I think, in the Big Ten. But it starts with those guys up front.
Mike Babcock's with us, HailVarsity.com and magazine. Get your yearbook ordered today. Get your subscription, print and digital today. You can log on, HailVarsity.com/offer. Get it ordered, get it taken care of. Be a happy Nebraska fan as you get into the summer months. Incredible previews, storylines, features in your Nebraska College Football Bible with the Hail Varsity Yearbook. Mike, about 30 seconds, bud. What's happening the rest of the week with you? What's on your radar?
I'm actually editing stories for the yearbook, the position previews. We're working on that already. There's some good stuff in there in the position previews. And, I'll point out to Elijah, too, that Nebraska played against UCLA when Mark Harmon was there.
He beat him. Harmon, yes. Walk-off. Mike, thank you so much, bud. Always fun to chat with you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate you. There he is, Mike Babcock. We'll get into the rushing element here. Hail Varsity continues.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Mike Babcock did leave us a parting shot with the Bill Callahan role in the Bill Callahan story. Michael Weatherly, he's with NCIS. So, yeah, he kind of looks like Billy C. Totally whiffed on that. You have Sam Griesel, part of a Netflix movie. So we got into football roles. If you're casting director, who are you casting as some of Nebraska's past football coaches? We can even go basketball. Well, I haven't got a great comp for Danny Nee or even Tim Miles or Barry Collier.
Well, I think we need to get some of the Nebraska media people in this movie as well. I'm saying Mike Babcock could be played by an older Marlon Brando. And obviously, Marlon Brando has since passed. I think that was 15 years ago.
Long time ago.
But I'm talking post-Godfather Marlon Brando when he's in his older years as an actor. Mike Babcock.
Okay.
I can see it.
Okay.
That's also just a bit of a compliment to Babbers as well. Imagine your life story being played by Marlon Brando. That's
sure.
Great.
I'm sure if you talk to any of the casting directors, it was always pleasant to have Marlon Brando on set.
Say that tongue-in-cheek.
I do, very heavily. So the rushing component, we were talking about the Sims comp with Hendon Hooker. It's in reference to an On3 story. And what is different about what Nebraska's offense can be, not just the RPO element or the physicality want. I mean, that's par for the course in the Big Ten to be a tough physical offense and defense. But the rushing numbers, you know who led the Big Ten rushing last year as quarterbacks?
From quarterbacks alone?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
It's going to shock you.
It's going to shock me? Mm-hmm. That makes me think it's probably going to be... Well, if it's going to shock me, I'd say it's Aiden O'Connell. But I don't think it's going to shock me that much. I would probably go with... Really? J.J. McCarthy?
And he just had a smidge over 300 yards, like 329 or something like that.
See, my backup behind Aiden O'Connell was going to be Stroud, because he doesn't run all that much. Maybe he'd surprise me.
Scramble for about 30 a game, right?
Yeah. But McCarthy is a bit of a surprise, because we were talking about that with Mike in terms of if you want to play like the teams that you want to be. I don't think of the teams like Iowa and Michigan and Wisconsin as having a rushing quarterback, but J.J. McCarthy last year is leading the league, and I think... I don't want to say...
He was mobile enough, I could see it, but it wasn't just straight up zone read with him because of how good Michigan's running game was, the 1-2 punch with Corum and company. But think about if Nebraska can get, 120 out of their running back and another 75 to 80 from their quarterback a game. I mean, there's your 200. 200's kind of the new benchmark. It's not $3 bills a game like it was when I was growing up, but I'll take 200 on the ground. The last time Nebraska did that was the Amir year. So, yeah, give me anywhere between 60 and 80 on the ground from my quarterback. Just keep him healthy. One thing, too, as ESPN broke down the different tiers of quarterbacks that are heading into this 2023 season, your top tiers, obviously, your national championship contenders. And you have to go down to tier 6 with where they have Sims listed. And you've got a slew, about 6 other ACC quarterbacks that are trying to reboot. And the write-up here as to why, that's way down the list here. And it's really star potential. And the write-up on Sims was a potential star that flashed a lot. But stop me if you've heard this before, languished behind a woeful offensive line. I don't think Nebraska's offensive line is going to be anywhere near as bad as Georgia Tech's. I'm going to buy stock in the offensive line if the head coach is very, very vocal about how good he thinks they can be.
And let's also bring it up real quick here, because I've seen this out there this week, and I don't mean to derail your conversation, Schmidt, but people saying this week, man, Matt Rule really whiffed on keeping Raiola around because you lost out on Dylan. That
Nothing
was
to do with it.
Not the case at all. Again, I said it at the time whenever that hire was announced. I'll say it again. It has nothing to do with it. Whenever you look at the success of Nebraska's offensive line over the past couple of years, which really was not there, you're not going to pin your hopes for a quarterback on that position group. And I don't think Matt Rhule is the type to do that in general, to put any position coach in a place where he's going to be the guy because we want to get his nephew here on campus, especially with the offensive line. And if it comes out that Matt Rhule kept Raiola around in hopes of getting Dylan Raiola, it would completely change my perception of Matt Rhule, because that was a move that would be absolutely ridiculous given where Nebraska's offensive line has been in the past couple years. And I don't think Matt Rhule is dumb enough as a football coach to take the most important position in terms of what you want to do offensively and what matters in the Big Ten, take that position group and have it be coached by a guy that you just have him around because you want to get his nephew in recruitment. That would be an absolutely ridiculous notion. I just want to put that out there right now. That is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. To think that Matt Rhule kept him around to get Dylan Raiola in the boat. That's ridiculous.
It's not how you win as a football coach. Does it help? Does it keep you in the race? Does it get you in the door? Yeah, and it got the previous staff in the door. So, yeah, there's a tie there, but it's bigger than one guy. Mm-hmm. And it's bigger than a family connection. The family's going to want what's best for the family, and what's best for the family is to go see if you can get it done at Georgia. That was the consensus. No hard feelings, no bruised egos, no hurt Christmas cards, none of that. You wish everyone well. You totally get it. You want what's best for your loved ones. And no, you don't blow it up. And as many guys on this staff that's coached offensive line, they wouldn't have kept him around if they didn't think he was good. Yeah, and really, really talented at what he does. And most importantly, not only did they trust their own feedback on Raiola when they talked with him and saw him work, they got feedback from the offensive line themselves. And now, you're not going to say, yeah, this guy's garbage, get him out of here. They were still frustrated about Coach Austin being let go. So for him to win them over like he did in this tumultuous final Frost year says a lot about Coach Raiola and what they believe he's teaching them to do.
And let's not forget Raiola, a great resume as well. The people he has coached under, the places he has coached, I mean, what he did at Wisconsin, he has A+ reviews about anywhere he has come from. This is a merit-based hire of Raiola. Now, if it happens to be the fact that your nephew is also a great player that we're going to try to go after as well, I guess you can add it to the pros list, but it's not the top of the list. That's not why he was kept around. That is so far from anything we know about who Matt Rhule is as a football coach to try to pull a move like that is absolutely ridiculous. And maybe it'll come out in 3 years that I'm wrong. And in which case that would completely change my perception of Rhule. But I just had to get that out there and lay that on the table. That is one of the most ridiculous.
It's a non-familiar hire, but you went with it anyway because he meshed with what your offensive coordinator thought.
Yes.
I mean, Satterfield's the guy like, okay, I think we can really do well with this guy, and we're not out looking, and we're not off base with our philosophy on what we want to do offensively. So let's keep a guy around. And you're not going to just go charity work here with that position group. To your point, as important as it is in this conference and in year one, and historically speaking, what it's been about.
And from a Power 5 experience point of view, Raiola is one of your most experienced position coaches. He's got one of the best resumes in terms of what he has done everywhere he has gone.
Well, he can get him to work and see if he can get him better. That's the plan. We'll wind down hour one. Hail Varsity continues.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Evan Bland going to join us coming up in about 10 minutes from the Omaha World Herald. Talk some Husker ball with Evan. 489-1240. Can email Chris at hailvarsity.com. An email to get here from Kent. Reminder to get buckled up. Use your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries only if properly worn. Buckle up, a message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. And get to some more of your stream comments. Really good take here from Kent. Did some research. And Kent said, look, Brewer at Baylor with Rhule averaged about 10 carries a game in the Big 12. Attractive to Husker fans for sure, but will Sims be able to handle that in the Big 10? Not much behind him. Well, we know that the thing that guys behind him can do best in the limited scope we've seen is run the football. Purdy's athletic. He also got dinged running the football. And you have Harburg that I think we're all anxious to see more of beyond what we saw in the spring game, as he's been talked up by the head man with where he's gone as a passer. And he came out at Kearney Catholic as a guy that can chuck the football. So it really comes down to risk and reward here. You're going to risk it any time there's a QB run call, for sure. You're going to risk it if he's got to get out of trouble and scramble downfield, but that's also going to mess with defenses. You just got to make sure you get him ready. And I think by tackling in practice, that is better than not tackling in practice as far as being able to take some bumps and bruises and hits, learn how to fall. I remember Crouch talking in one interview with us just about how growing up running the option like he did really allowed him and his body to get used to it and learn how to fall, learn how to brace yourself. Not that you're not going to feel it, but you're not going to get just slammed and KO'd, because Saturday is way different than Monday through Thursday.
And this is football we're talking about here. Anytime you step in between those white lines on a football field, you are putting yourself at risk. That's just how the game is being played. That is what the game is at heart. I don't think you can go into a season and go into an offensive scheme saying we want to mitigate risk. Like even in the NFL with design quarterback runs, these guys are told, get down when possible, get out of bounds when possible. But at the end of the day, it's football, and there's always going to be risks involved with football. Even with a non-running quarterback, there's a risk whenever the defensive end comes off the blind side and smacks you from behind. There is just an inherent
always
risk
a chance to get
football.
hurt.
And I think if you are calling your offense in a way or designing your playbook in a way to mitigate the risk, you're putting yourself behind the eight ball, because that is just what football is at its core. It is a risky sport to play. Injuries happen in football, and I think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage if you call your offense in a way that is, we're not going to get the quarterback hurt.
He can't be your primary runner. That's just what it comes down to.
You're also putting yourself at risk if you put him into unnecessary risk, but you can't try to avoid risk from your quarterback. That's just what the game of football is.
The goal, if you're Nebraska, is to have a offensive line and that stable of running backs that you think is your deepest position group, and have them be really, really good for you, and then sprinkle in a little Sims.
Yeah, and another important part in football is having a competent backup quarterback that you trust that can go in there and get the job done whenever injuries do happen. That's anywhere on the football field.
Get them developed, get them repped, get them prepped.
There's a reason you need it 2 deep and not a 1 deep.
Good email from Kent. More emails next hour. Chris at HailVarsity.com. Hail Varsity Radio. On to Hour 2, Evan Bland, and then a Jock Doc. Open phones much of Hour 2, 489-1240. Hail Varsity presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back with you. It's Hour 2 at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We welcome in our friend Evan Bland from the Omaha World Herald at Evan Bland, OWH, read him with Omaha.com as we say hello. Evan, going to be a little drama or a lot of drama in West Lafayette the next few days. How are we doing?
Yeah, I never thought I'd be pulling up the weather app to see what the conditions would be like in West Lafayette, but there's no doubt. And for people that need a refresher, Purdue canceled a game there last year that eventually cost Nebraska a spot in the Big Ten tournament. It was sort of I think it's fair to say it was sort of a sketchy cancellation. They could have played a doubleheader the day before. They could have played earlier in that last day. They didn't. And they were playing Maryland, which was a top 15 national seed, where if they had lost, they would have been out. And so Nebraska remembers that, man. Talking with Will Bolt and some of the players today, they have some long memories about what occurred, even though they didn't play Purdue last year. And so in sort of a twist of fate, and maybe the schedule makers in the Big Ten have a sense or a good idea of storylines here, but now Nebraska can maybe do to Purdue what Purdue did to them a year ago. So it does. You wouldn't think like the baseball rivalry between Nebraska and Purdue would be much of anything, but after last year, there's definitely some spice going on.
You nailed it. It is about the spice, and in my wildest dreams, that is nothing Will Bolt would ever be wired to do, even if it would have meant getting into the tournament, and Purdue qualified last year by the weather. So, yeah, I mean, good for them having the elephant memory on this. Now, right, Nebraska, if they sweep Purdue, assuming there's no Kevin Costner rain delays that are invoked, Nebraska can keep Purdue home, correct?
Yeah, and it's not just if they were to sweep them. They could also the other kind of key thing to watch is what Michigan State does, and they're playing Indiana, which is co first place right now with Maryland. They have a lot to play for, and so Michigan State and Purdue are both tied at 10 and 11 in the league. And if those two teams have identical weekends, then Michigan State goes because of a head-to-head tiebreaker. So Purdue needs to have a better weekend than Michigan State does. And wouldn't you know it, if, say, they needed to cancel a game, it actually could turn into their benefit much the way that last year did. What's also kind of funny, though, is unlike Maryland last year, which had a curfew and had to get home on that last day on Saturday, Nebraska, I think you could say with some purpose, didn't schedule their flight back until Sunday. So they have full flexibility to play 3 games, make sure those things get in, whatever time of day you got to do it. If you got to do a doubleheader, so be it. They're very willing to play 3 games this weekend and see what happens.
Evan Bland is with us here from the Omaha World Herald. We're talking some Husker baseball. And Evan, take me through it. Based on this weekend, what's the highest possible seed Nebraska get in the Big Ten tournament? What's the lowest possible seed? Like, how much is actually at stake here for Nebraska when you look at this weekend series with all the rain in the forecast?
Well, you haven't really had fun until you've gone through Big Ten common opponent records and broken things down like that. But, kind of the way that I phrased it, like mathematically they're still alive to be the 1 seed, but the odds are longer than a Bryce Harper pull shot to left with the wind howling out. Like, you'd have to see Maryland and Indiana both be swept. You'd have to see Iowa lose at least once to a really bad Northwestern team, and Nebraska would have to sweep. So, it's kind of fun with scenarios. You're not expecting that to happen. More likely, they'll probably win, say, 2 out of 3. They're tied right now with Rutgers and Michigan. They'll probably have the tiebreaker with both, depending on what Rutgers does. So the most likely scenario is they'll end up somewhere in that 4th, 5th, 6th range. Worst case happens and they get swept, and they could fall as far as 7th if things break that way. But, again, it's a good situation for Nebraska because they're in the field, and as such, you can manage your pitching a little bit more because they acknowledge the fact that no matter what happens at Purdue this weekend, it's going to come down to that Big Ten tournament in Omaha, and you're going to have to win it to advance into the regionals and be where you want to be. So I think you can expect, some shorter probably outings from your starters and some of your top-end guys, knowing that it's possible that you could have to play Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and on to try to get to where you want to be. So I think that's probably something else to keep in mind, not to be surprised if they're a little more conservative with their high-end arms. But, as I've said, I feel like the case for Nebraska to make a deep run in the Big Ten tournament is based around the star power that they have that's really hard to match from other teams. And so this weekend is about finding momentum, and if you can, stick it to the team that stuck it to you a year ago, all the better.
Evan Bland joining us, Hail Varsity Radio, at Evan Bland, OWH on Twitter is where you find him. So say things go great for Nebraska. Say they put a win streak together, they find their way into a regional. They've got the power and the pitching to do it. It's just not been a consistent situation this year for whatever reason. Does that take a spot, or do they add a spot with the Big Ten? As you see it, is it Maryland, Indiana, Iowa that are in, or is it just 2? What's the number right now? What's the crop report for the projected NCAA seedings?
Yeah, I think they're probably on target for right around 3, assuming that one of those 3 teams were to win the auto bid in Omaha. I think, Indiana's right on the fringe, Iowa's right on the fringe, and actually Maryland is a little bit behind both of those teams. I think they're right around the 40 number, which is right on the edge of where you want to be. So, you would anticipate that they would take care of business this weekend, and then if they win a game or 2 in Omaha, you feel pretty good about their chances of getting in. So I think those are the 3 teams, Maryland, Iowa, Indiana, that you probably would say today you feel good about their chances of getting in. And then, that 4th team, I think, is probably going to have to win the tournament to get in. Maybe you could say Rutgers, if they get hot, they could maybe stake a claim to an at-large bid as well. But anybody other than that, whether you're talking about Michigan or Nebraska, Illinois, I suppose, those are all teams that are going to have to get hot and win this thing. So the Big Ten at its height back in the late 2010s, I think 2019, they had 5 bids that tied a league high that they've ever had into the NCAA tournament. So I don't think you're going to see that number, but I think you're feeling pretty good about 3 and maybe 4, depending on who wins the tournament.
Evan, give me a prediction here. If Nebraska does get hot this final weekend, they take some momentum into the Big Ten tournament and make a deep run, who, and I'm talking 1 or 2 guys here, who needs to be one of those top performers for Nebraska in terms of Nebraska can go as far as these guys can take them?
Well, the easy answer is your 2 stars, the guys who are going to get drafted pretty highly in July, and Bryce Matthews and Max Anderson. Those guys are right around 20 home runs. They're incredible talents, and so typically this is the time of year when those guys, the stars, come out, right? So I think that's probably your easier answer. But I think starting pitching is probably going to be just as key as well. We've seen weekends where Emmett Olson and Jace Kaminska have looked like aces. We've seen weekends where they're out in the 3rd inning and the bullpen's scrambling, and that sort of sets you back for the weekend. So that's probably that next layer is can a guy like Olson and Kaminska, who in and of themselves I think are draft prospects and who may well be in their last seasons at Nebraska, can they go out and give you 6 strong innings and turn it over to the bullpen and really set you up. That's probably a little bit more important in a tournament format than it would be in a weekend series because, again, you're going to have to win potentially, 4 days in a row, depending on how things break. You're going to need somebody beyond the guys that you're used to counting on to step up and to come through, and that's going to be mitigated if you have some of your starters go 6 or 7. So I think it'd be those guys, and it would be the sluggers who've carried you all year at the top.
Evan, I want to go to football here, and tough news for Nebraska fans with Dylan Raiola. Good on him for going with what his gut says, and really impressive job by Georgia. Don't kid yourself. The rings and the titles are cool, but they were on him early. As you look at Nebraska right now and the recruiting board and just how the momentum sits right now, what's your thought here as summer approaches and kind of where Nebraska can pick up some momentum, or just your overall take on where things stand with Nebraska's class for 2024?
Well, I think with the quarterback portion of it, with the Dylan Raiola news, to me the first word that comes to mind is relief, honestly, that there's just resolution to the process and you can move on. Now, of course, you want Dylan Raiola. You play that thing out all the way to the end. They had multiple ins with the number 1 prospect in the country, and you have to see where that goes, even if that sets you back somewhere else. But now that domino has fallen, I think you kick the tires on some of the other guys that you've liked. Daniel Kalen, what's his interest level now that he's committed to Missouri? Is there a potential there? There are a couple other quarterbacks that they've had interest in or contact with that you could turn to and see, just kind of gauge interest in. But I think the key at this point is to not take a guy just to take a guy. I mean, if you don't feel strongly about anybody left in this crop, and that's possible given that a lot of those top quarterbacks in this class have committed, then I think, you look to, one, the transfer portal. That's been a place that has been good to Nebraska with this staff and the previous staff. And then, two, you start going all in on the class of 2025. A guy like Stone Sanders, who's been on campus a couple of times and likes it. They're putting out multiple offers to other kids at the quarterback position in future classes as well. So, you have 3 quarterbacks now. It's half as many as you had a month ago, essentially. You still don't know what maybe Logan Smothers' final destination is, and Matt Rule made it seem pretty clear that the door was open for Smothers to come back if he wanted to, so we'll see how that plays out as well. But I think if you're Nebraska, you look at the quarterback situation and you say you're pretty happy with Jeff Sims, certainly this year, maybe for 2 years. You've got Heinrich Harburg, who's impressed this staff and has multiple years of eligibility remaining, so I don't think you feel like you need to be in a rush to get someone in, even though in an ideal world you'd love to have maybe a freshman or a sophomore to be here right now and developing and coming along. But, again, I just think the guys they have right now, you feel good about in the immediate future, and then you can start planning ahead with the portal and future classes if you need to as well.
And Evan, quickly here, based on recent history, not only with Nebraska, but the college football world as a whole, there's not usually a shortage of at least passable quarterbacks you can go get in the transfer portal.
No, not at all. I mean, look around the Big Ten West. I think almost every school is going to start a transfer portal quarterback this year. That's just sort of the way that it's gone. And I think we've been around the portal enough to know that it's going to be hard to find linemen in there. But if you want to find a skill position player, or if you want to find a quarterback, probably even a highly touted former prep quarterback, you can do that. And so I think that's probably why there's less of an urgency for it for Nebraska than there would have been even 5 years ago.
And Evan, here, I don't mean to change the subject on you before we get up. We got about 2 minutes left, and I need to get your thoughts on last night's NBA draft lottery and the luckiest franchise in the NBA getting lucky yet again.
Oh, you're too kind to bring that up. No, it's been a long-suffering couple years for the San Antonio Spurs, and I don't know a lot of Spurs fans around here. I grew up one because I liked David Robinson back in the day, and Tim Duncan's my favorite all-time player. But, yeah, I didn't expect it. They have one really crappy season, and it turns into Victor Wembanyama. And I mean, wow, right? That's just hard to believe. It's almost, strangely humbling. What did they do to deserve such good fortune, again, in a year when you have a slam dunk #1 pick and generational talent? But, at this point, Greg Popovich probably won't retire. Why would you when you have this guy coming in and you have the resume that he does? But, I was thinking, too, what better situation for Victor to come into where he can turn to a former #1 pick like Tim Duncan about what he's experienced, or a guy like Tony Parker, who's a fellow Frenchman. It seems almost too perfect. And it was hard to believe, but a pretty cool moment after a season that was awfully forgettable.
Yes or no, did you have the David Robinson pumps as a kid?
I had a jersey, but not the pumps.
It was cheaper to get the jersey, man.
Well, that's true.
Well, and I'm sitting here doing some thinking. Evan said, I'm not sure what the Spurs did to deserve this. Now, I think keeping Popovich around after, as Evan said, a couple forgettable seasons might be all the good karma you need to get a guy like that, especially with what the NBA is nowadays, where if you don't live up to your expectations for 1 year, you're gone.
Pop's awesome, though. I mean, he's done it, and he's done it for decades, and they've been that dynasty that has spanned multiple years, and they just every 3 years they'd get a ring. Man, they were a ton of fun to watch.
Yeah, and it was on a personal level, Tim Duncan was drafted when I was in middle school. And he played until I was into my 30s. And, it was just, he stayed on the same team, right? I didn't have to do what LeBron James fans had to do, which was, am I a Cavs fan? Am I a Heat fan? He stayed. They won. It was, it was like your parents staying together the whole time. It was a blessed time. And, we'll see if that can continue here with the recent lottery winnings.
Evan Bland with us, Omaha World Herald. Evan, have a good week. Thanks for the time today.
Thanks, guys.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time at Hail Varsity Radio. Big thanks to Evan Bland. Catch him on the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Also, Mike Babcock in hour one. Open phones here till about 5:40 or so, 489-1240. So let's talk long shots with Nebraska football, specifically odds to win the Big Ten championship. FanDuel out with more data for your brain, as Vegas has released new odds on the Big Ten football championships. This comes as things seem to be pretty competitive. I think we all think on paper and on film what's coming back at Michigan's pretty impressive. You assume, it's never safe to assume, but you assume Ohio State's just going to plug and play the next really talented quarterback to go with a pretty solid group of lines of scrimmages. And then, yes, their receiving core is insane. Penn State, can they make the jump? They're supposed to be really talented, but what do they do at quarterback? Is Alec going to be the guy, that five-star that comes in and does his thing, or is it going to be bumps in the road for a phenom that is got a shot to win the job that early? Traditionally, worst case, he's been a redshirt freshman behind center at Penn State. But we get to Nebraska. Nebraska just behind Illinois and in front of Michigan State with the odds. 9. When I think of the number 9, I think of Ferris Bueller and Rooney saying 9 absences this quarter, 9 times. 9th on the list. That seems really high in a good way if you're a Nebraska fan, considering you're coming into a new year, a new coach, a new system, a new defense, and the schedule's, 61st or 62nd strength of schedule, so it's more favorable than it's been in past years, but the West isn't fun or easy. You also get Michigan, albeit at home, as your crossover. You start with Minnesota on the road. You have to go up to Wisconsin this year. You at least get Iowa at home. You also have Sparty. So 2 of your 3 crossovers, and quite honestly, all 3 of your crossovers at worst this year could end up with 8 or 9 wins. Yes, Michigan is supposed to win 10.5, 11 ball games with their win projections, but Sparty, what are they going to be about as they try to replace a quarterback? They're still pretty good, and you got to go there. And then Maryland. Maryland's one of those it teams with a returning quarterback, high-level offense. So the crossovers are no good. All of that with road trips to Madtown and Minneapolis, and you're 9th. You're 9th on the list at plus 6,000. So, hey, what do you think? Are you heading to Vegas anytime soon? Are you going to put a hundy down, Elijah? Say, let's just let it ride and then throw a party afterwards if Nebraska ends up back in Indy?
No.
No?
No. That's I'm.
You could collect money and put a collected 100 down and split it up, and everyone would be happy.
I could. In the 2 places my mind goes to this is, one, the fact that Nebraska 2 years ago had enough talent on the football field to be a team that could have been playing in Indy. Now, Nebraska was far from that. And I don't want to bring up the whole, they're the best 9-loss team in the country, like the best 3-win team in the country, whichever way you want to put it. I don't want to go there again. But, let's be honest, whenever you do have all those one-score losses, Nebraska, from a talent perspective, exclusively talent, I'm not talking execution, I'm not talking coaching, I'm not talking any of that. Purely from the amount of talent that you had on that football field, you were good enough to go be a 9-win football team, maybe a 10-win football team. Now, do teams commonly not live up to how good you could be? Yes. So more realistically, Nebraska's probably a 6 or a 7-win team with that amount of talent if they get an average amount of execution and just an average level of coaching. So Nebraska's had talent in recent years. With that being said, this is a first-year football coach, not for, at least at Nebraska, a first-year coach who's going to have learning difficulties, if you will, getting his system implemented. There's going to be hiccups early in the year as you try to get things figured out. I wouldn't place that kind of bet on Nebraska to make it to Indy on a first-year head coach. That's just something that's, I think, irresponsible to go and do because of the growing pains that are going to happen with a first-year head coach, especially with how many position coaches he has on staff that while he's familiar with them, he hasn't directly worked with them. There's a lot of questions in my mind when it comes to that. Could Nebraska make a jump in the first year? Yeah, I 100% believe that Matt Rhule can get more out of the talent that he has with him on his roster than what was gotten out of talent in the past couple seasons. I don't think that necessarily translates to Nebraska's a good bet to make it to Indy.
You go 5-4 in the league. You finish third in the West or tied for third. You're in contention into November. I think that's an incredible season. I think that's an incredible year one. And we got to ask ourselves, is Iowa going to step back? Their defense, it's going to be hard to expect Iowa's defense to be as good as it was last year. But you got a transfer quarterback in from Michigan, all right, in McNamara. They've got to presumably be better on offense to complement the defense. Wisconsin, Fickell, I don't know. Can he figure it out at quarterback? Maybe he doesn't have to. He still has an incredible running back and defense to lean on. The Illini, they're always about physicality and toughness. Can they reload a little bit or at least be half as competitive defensively? That was a great unit. And then there's Minnesota. All the 40-yard sprint champion does is win 9 ball games, it seems like. We haven't talked about Purdue, really, and what they have in a new coach and what's left in the cupboard. And then there's Northwestern. Everybody's counted out Fitz. They've been awful the last 2 years. They've also surprised the world and won the Big Ten West 2 times in the last 5 years. So I think the 600-1 odds, while fun, are probably right there. But just based on this body of work and based on the perceived learning curve, hey, I don't disagree. That gets us into CBS Sportsline and their ranking of coaches. And right now they rank every FBS coach. Some notable names. Dion comes in at 55. Coach Venables at Oklahoma in at 52. But you got a ton, and right now they're only up through number 26. Hugh Freeze comes in at 26 of Auburn, 1 spot in front of, say it with me, Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule comes in as the 27th best coach in FBS this year, and he has just an abundance of respect by the national media for his turnaround jobs, and they're thinking 10 games by year 3 is what he'll win. You have other analysts already projecting Nebraska out in Las Vegas. Why not make it the Las Vegas Bowl for Nebraska v. Utah? So Matt Rhule, 3 spots ahead of Kirk Ferentz, who comes in at number 30. He dropped 17 spots from the 2022 ranking this time last year as he came in at 13. Fitz is down to 45th best in the country. He was all the way up to number 21 in 2022. Mel Tucker, also a nosedive from 2022, was a top 25 coach. Mel Tucker is seen as the 47th best. And then you have Loxley of Maryland in at 49. He's a riser. Greg Schiano right at 50. Further down the trough, you have Coach Allen at Indiana in the mid-60s. So Rhule's already seen as a better coach heading into this 2023 season than a number of opponents. You have to presume the top 25 will get released later on in the week. In this top 25 list, we'll have Coach Bielema. It'll have Fickell. It'll have Harbaugh. It'll have Day. It'll probably have Harbaugh and Day in the top 4. And I would think you'd have Fickell and Bielema in the top 15 to top 20.
See, I'm trying to go find our tier rankings that we did about a month ago, you, me, and Connor, for our coaches and see how closely it falls in line with this, because what I'm hearing is similar to what we laid out. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to figure out, we had Tom Allen at the bottom. Mm-hmm. I know I have this somewhere in my phone if you give me 2 seconds.
No, you're good. No, I think we're pretty confident in Rhule in that top 5 or top 6. I mean, he's better than half of the league outside the elite, probably outside of that top 3. We wrestle with where we put Fleck, personality versus performance. We also wrestle with Fitz because no one's got a situation like him. all he's done is produce some first-rounders and go win Big Ten West championships, go to the Big Ten title game. But the floor has been buried basement compared to the highs the Northwestern programs had. I mean, for him to get 10-win seasons, which he's done, he'll stack those, and then it will absolutely be a vicious, vicious rebuild. They'll go from the penthouse to the outhouse rather quickly. It'll be one of those, oh my God, seasons where you go 9-3 and then it's 3-9.
So from our tier rankings, we had it, as you remember, elite being our top tier, which I kind of see as a top 10 coach in the country, maybe top 8. Great, which kind of to me is between that 10 and 20 range. Good, which to me is between 20 and 50. Mm-hmm. Mid, which I see is between 50 and 75. And then the final ranking is how are you still employed, which I see as less than 75, at least in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. We had it Ryan Day and Harbaugh as being your elite top 10 coach kind of guys, which we'll find out a little bit later this week. That's where I'd assume both of those guys would fall. In our great, we had Bielema and Franklin, which I believe, considering they're not listed yet, would be top 25.
I left Franklin out, yep.
So those two guys, top. I think that kind of falls in line with where we had them ranked, but somewhere between 10 and 20, 10 and 25. In the good, which I see as 25 to 50, we had Ferentz, Fickle, Fitzgerald, PJ Fleck, and Rule.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's fair. We don't have Fleck listed yet, but he's going to get some love. He'll probably be right around 20. I did not list his name off yet either. When we look at Fleck and we look at what's going on at Penn State, it's conceivable to have them up there. I mean, Franklin will be right in that top 10. And a lot of times your coaching ranking coincides with your program ranking because Penn State's been top 10 aside from the step back year they had during COVID. So, but now, and I think you have the opportunity for Rule to go from good to great. Same with Fickle. If they get things kind of up and away rather quickly. And I think Fickle has a chance to do that quicker than Rule, but I think Rule can do it in short order as well. And right now, I mean, it's more of with Fleck, can you stand the guy? I mean, that's a problem for a lot of folks. But man, he does it well on the field. Jock Doc's on the way. It's Hail Varsity. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back into it. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. Time for a Jock Doc Wednesday. Nebraska Orthopedic Center. Dr. Brandon Seifert with us. Dr. Brandon, how we doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you guys doing?
We're good. We're doing a little better than Walker Buehler. The Dodgers, not one but two Tommy Johns, and what a promising draft pick and 2021 season, and he's got his sights set on September 1st. Dr. Brandon, how crazy is it for a guy to have not one but two Tommy John reconstructions?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And obviously, Walker, great player. I've really enjoyed watching him play, especially when he first came up. And obviously, that 21 season was pretty magical. So as you think about Walker, he had his original or his index UCL procedure, Tommy John procedure. That was done back in 2015. So you think about that 15, he recovers, has a nice MLB career, has this great year in 21, and now he's in a scenario here. And they didn't allude to the fact about when this kind of all started for him. But I'm guessing sometime in the last couple of months this started. And I'm not sure if this was kind of a one-time event or just a gradual worsening over time. But essentially, he's arrived at a point now where he feels unstable. His velocity's down. They've done a bunch of studies on him and found that he's basically re-torn his UCL graft or his Tommy John graft. Just to review on this, we've talked about Tommy John a lot on the show before. Anatomically, as we talk about, Tommy John surgery, you'll hear me kind of use some terms interchangeably. Ulnar collateral ligament, UCL, that's the same thing. That's basically the ligamentous structure. If you feel on the inside of your elbow, there's kind of a bump that's there. They call it your funny bone. We call it the medial epicondyle. That's basically where this ligament attaches to on the top side of the humerus and inserts down kind of below. But essentially what happens is it stretches out over time, and you lose that ability to kind of whip your elbow through when you're trying to generate velocity. So at any rate, how often does this happen? It's somewhere between 15, even up to 20% in some studies. And so the number is reasonably high. Typically, we'll see if somebody's going to have a re-tear. It's usually somewhere between year 3 and year 5 after their primary procedure. Those are some of the stats that are out there.
Yeah, and Dr. Brandon, this one happened pretty much 6 years after his first Tommy John procedure, as that occurred back in 2015. I guess 7 years. That was bad math on my part. The second one occurring in 2022, and he had surgery back in August. Recovery time expected to be 14 to 18 months on the second one. Does all that sound about right to you? 7 years out, and now it's another 14 to 18 months. Is that typical?
Yeah, it sure is. And there's quite a bit of variability in terms of those rehab protocols, post-revision as opposed to a primary. But if you throw kind of some average numbers out there, it really does range on the surgeon somewhere between 12 months up to 18 months. He's going to kind of fall in that 14 to 16 month range is what it looks like for his recovery.
And Dr. Brandon, Walker Buehler himself said he's shooting for September 1st to be the time he's back. As for Dodgers manager Dave Roberts, he said, it's hard to bet against this guy, but September 1st is not what I was hearing in terms of Buehler's recovery. 12 months, though, in your opinion, not out of the question?
Yeah, it's probably pushing it a little bit. Especially for a guy, he's kind of later 20s, he probably could get a few more years out of this. So you really want to make sure that you take the time to get better. And they'll watch him closely. I know the sports med staff well that takes care of the Dodgers, and they're gonna be careful with him. And so he's going to have to look pretty amazing for them to want to release him. Interestingly enough about statistics on this is kind of really where the statistics are kind of fascinating with regard to this injury. As you look at like a primary Tommy John surgery, and you kind of specifically, any type of all-comers for baseball players, pitchers, that return to play rate kind of at the same level or higher is pretty high in the stats, somewhere between anywhere from 50 ranging all the way up to 90% in some studies. But if you look at, what's the return to play after revision rates, it's very different. One, just looking specifically at major league players, typically somebody who has a primary Tommy John versus a revision, you're going to get about maybe 5 years is kind of the average lead time you would have after a primary Tommy John. But after a revision, that drops down to almost maybe 2.5 years. So kind of interesting statistic on those two in terms of recovery.
2 years, man. So what can the Dodgers and what can batters expect from Buehler stuff-wise? I mean, his velocity was incredible. His fastball was nails. His breaking pitches, Cy Young level. And now he's got to kind of hoe this road again. Is he going to have to reinvent how he gets guys out? I mean, is his velocity going to be that big a question mark?
Yeah, great question. So those are the interesting things they've kind of looked at study-wise. So typically velocity gets pretty darn close to where it was before, even in a revision setting. The things that do tend to change is more kind of your durability. So obviously that career longevity tends to change, but also kind of your duration of the kind of volume of pitches that they're throwing in games. You tend to be able to throw for a few innings. What is interesting, though, the innings that they do pitch, their strike count and ERA tends to remain pretty close to what it was before, but they tend to go up, interestingly enough, in walks. If you look at some of the studies that are out there. But really it kind of boils down to you tend to have, they'll throw less pitches, but your stuff's still pretty good. What's interesting is the return to play rate at the same level is much lower if you're a starting pitcher versus if you're a relief pitcher, which makes sense. You're coming in as a relief for a couple of innings as opposed to multiple as a starter.
If you're the Dodgers here, would you consider moving Walker Buehler to your bullpen to be a guy that comes out and only has to pitch a couple innings, now with this being his second injury?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm probably still thinking about as talented as he is, maybe he's the guy that can go 3 or 4 innings for you and just be lights out. And so maybe you put him in that starting role. I think that's what they would do. I would assume they would, as good as he has been, I would assume they would at least try him out in that starter role again. But, he's a guy that obviously he's struggling there, then you want to move him to relief so you can get basically as much time out of him as possible in terms of a career.
Can you supplement that lack of velocity with your arm and elbow with extra lower body work? I mean, I guess I'm asking, how do you get around it on the return.
Sticky stuff?
No, I'm not asking about spider tack. I'm asking about, can you just start doing 1,000 squats a day?
Yeah, well, Harris from Major League, right? So, from that perspective, absolutely. What's really interesting about these is, as you hit that kind of primary index procedure, that's one of the things they really look at is what's your mechanics look like in these. There were some early studies that showed, a higher percentage of athletes needing Tommy John, whose, maybe mechanics weren't great. So, you heard the term an all-arm thrower. And so trying to fix that, you would hope that at least after you've had that primary UCL, they fix some of those things for you. But still, if you're a guy who doesn't have great, core strength, doesn't have great hips, absolutely, Chris, I think you can make some of that up with really improving your core, your flexibility, just some of those generalized health issues. Maybe not looking like Cueto might help you be a little bit better from that perspective.
As Walker Buehler returns from this injury, do you worry about any other muscles in the arm picking up some of the slack, changing the throwing motion because of the injury, something that you'll have to untrain as you come back from this injury?
Yeah, absolutely. I worry about kind of some issues kind of moving more proximally or further up the arm. So if you start talking about some issues along that biceps, they tend to have some issues with some biceps, tendonitis, biceps dysfunction, even some rotator cuff dysfunction, because you're probably going to try to change either kind of the height of your arm slot. You might change some of that. Those mechanics obviously might change a little bit. And so you really do have to watch out for some secondary shoulder issues that might show up in these scenarios, which unfortunately can be common.
Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center. A Jock Doc Wednesday. Walker Buehler trying to get back from a second Tommy John. Dr. Brandon, thanks for a few minutes today.
All right, fellas. Thank you. Take care.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, big thanks to Evan Bland and Mike Babcock, Dr. Brandon Seifert as well. Tomorrow, Coach Barnett will run down Brandon Vogel. On a Thursday with Hail Varsity, we're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. So, did you start sweating? I was flipping through, watched a little bit of the Lakers and Denver last night. It was a 20-point spread, and then it got a little tight. Nice finish to the third quarter by Jokic as he just made Anthony Davis shake his head and smile. But then it got tighter. Good response from the Lakers, but do you feel good about Denver having too much?
In terms of the series as a whole? Yes, I do. I think they're going to have an adjustment. What really threw Jokic off his game was the Lakers putting in Rui Hachimura and letting Anthony Davis come from the weak side, be the help defender. It's because all year long and really most of the postseason, the Nuggets have been putting Aaron Gordon in that dunker spot down low on the low block and just be ready to clean anything up. Somebody's going to give you a pass, you're going to dunk it through. You can't have Anthony Davis clogging the paint. I think the Nuggets are going to have an adjustment for that. They've had it at least before this season, and they seem to take their foot off the gas a little bit in the fourth quarter and didn't quite make all the right reads there. But with what the Nuggets have in Jokic, who, if there was any doubt before last night, I don't think there should be any doubt right now that he is the best basketball player in the world at the moment. I think whenever you have him, I think you have Jamal Murray, who still battling through the illness, which has now been defined as it's been a serious ear infection he's been dealing with. He still drops in 31 points last night. I still feel good. Anthony Davis is going to get his. LeBron James is going to get his. I was texting my friends for the series. I said if they can consistently put up 60 to 70 points a game, those two, the Lakers are going to be able to hang around and make things tough. I don't think they can do that every single night. They got 66 out of those two, including 40 from Davis last night. I don't know how consistently those two are going to be able to do that. And then I look at the rest of the Lakers roster and I ask who else is going to step up and pick up the scoring. So
Crew says Lakers in 5.
Yeah, Crew is he needs to seek some help.
What about Boston and Miami? Celtics minus 8.5. Boston's just too loaded. First and second team, all NBAers, all rookie, all defense. I mean, you go down their roster. Wow. Jimmy Buckets is for real. Miami's been here before. Not necessarily with this crew, but they put a run together. They don't really care. They're going to do their thing, and I think this could go 6.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to the notion this is going to be a quick series. I think the Heat are dangerous, but I'm with you that I think the experience advantage from the Celtics, they've been there, they have done that. I mean, how many? I think it's 6 conference finals appearances in the last 8 years for the Celtics, some ridiculous number like that out of the East. Celtics have the experience advantage. They've been there. They've done that. I think that they're going to pull it out. I think they're going to get 2 wins at home here to start this series off. I think Miami could get 1, and I see kind of like you, Celtics in 5 or Celtics in 6. I think just the experience and the talent edge is on the side of the Celtics, so I'm not quite sure what Miami can do to counter
It could be
that.
something new and different with a Lakers-Boston final.
Don't say that. Don't put that bad juju out there.
This is pretty good. How about the Milwaukee Bucks interviewing Kelvin Sampson for the head coaching job? Kelvin did a lot of time on NBA benches while he was out of college ball. But Kelvin wants to, I think, gift the Houston program to his son, who's been learning from one of the best for a long time. I don't know where Philly turns. They're not in any hurry. Do you try with the Jay Wright route?
Ty Lue? Feels like anytime you have a team that you think should be performing better than they are, you just give Ty Lue a call.
You do. We'll be back tomorrow at 4. Thanks for your time. Thanks for tuning in to Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency.